Hitchcock changed thrillers forever. Some filmmakers took notes, others basically copied him, and some of those copies are actually worth your time. That's what we're talking about today. Critics of Brian De Palma have often said he spent most of his career ripping off Hitchcock. And if there's one film where that's impossible to deny, it's Obsession. Despite borrowing heavily from Vertigo, Obsession avoids the cheap shocks and gimmicky violence that define many Hitchcock imitators. Instead, De Palma leans into sweeping melodrama, romance, mystery, and suspense. Cliff Robertson stars as a businessman who loses his wife and daughter during a botched kidnapping. 16 years later, while traveling in Italy, he meets a woman who bears a striking resemblance to his dead wife. Robertson gives a strong leading performance here, capturing both the heartbreak of that loss and the obsession that follows. He was an actor who never quite received the recognition his work deserved, and this is one of his best roles. The Hitchcock connection is pushed even further by Bernard Herrmann's score. He's the composer behind Psycho and The Wrong Man, and his music here perfectly matches the film's haunting, melodramatic tone. Dial M for Murder started as a play by Frederick Knott, and Hitchcock turned it into a film back in the 1950s. About 40 years later, A Perfect Murder takes that same setup and updates it for the 90s. It kicks off with a steamy affair between Emily, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, and her lover David, played by Viggo Mortensen. At the same time, Emily's husband Stephen Taylor, played by Michael Douglas, is watching his business empire fall apart. Her money is the solution to his financial mess, and that quickly turns into a very convenient motive. Here comes the extra twist. Stephen hires David, his wife's lover, to kill her. David presents himself as a gifted artist, but he has another side and another identity. He's an ex-convict who seduces wealthy women and steals their money. So the film becomes a nasty little game between husband and lover, killer and blackmailer, with everyone setting traps for what they hope will be the perfect murder. Michael Douglas is the perfect anchor for this kind of story, and the film does a good job of slowly tightening the net around his arrogant schemer. Viggo Mortensen adds a lot as the two-faced lover, and David Suchet is well cast as the detective, even if he barely gets any screen time. The film keeps the familiar twists, throws in plenty of nods to the 1950s original, and lifts a lot of its tricks straight from Hitchcock's playbook. It may not be a perfect thriller, but it's a stylish 90s one with strong pacing, a solid story, and good performances. High Anxiety takes the Hitchcock-style comedy of Silver Streak and pushes it much further. Putting it on a Hitchcock rip-off list might be stretching the definition a bit, because this is really a loving tribute. But it's too much fun to leave out. Mel Brooks stars as Dr. Richard Thorndike, who arrives at the Psychoneurotic Institute for the very, very nervous as its new administrator. He suffers from what the film calls high anxiety, basically a mix of acrophobia and vertigo. At the Institute, he's surrounded by the thoroughly unhinged staff, including Dr. Montague, played by Harvey Korman, and Nurse Diesel, played by Cloris Leachman, while Professor Lillerman helps him deal with his condition. By recreating the look and feel of Hitchcock's films from the 1950s and 1960s, Brooks opens the door to a whole run of visual and narrative jokes. The film directly plays off Vertigo, Psycho, and The Birds, among others. Even the character dynamics feel deliberately Hitchcockian, especially the romance between Thorndike and Victoria Brisbane, an exaggeratedly breathy femme fatale played by Madeleine Kahn. Roadgames started when Australian director Richard Franklin gave the Rear Window script to screenwriter Everett de Roche as a reference. De Roche came back with a riff on the Hitchcock classic, where the nosy observer is no longer stuck in an apartment, but driving a truck across the Australian outback. The film stars Stacy Keach as an American trucker hauling meat through the wilderness. Early on, he notices a man in a strange green van picking up a hitchhiker, taking her to a motel, and then making sure the motel's trash is collected at 4 in the morning. His suspicions only grow from there, and of course they turn out to be right. Franklin directs the film with a lot of style. At times it feels as adventurous as the music videos of the early 80s, and the chaos on the open road is staged in ways that would impress another Australian filmmaker, George Miller. Keach eventually picks up Jamie Lee Curtis as a hitchhiker, and once again she avoids playing a helpless victim. She's smart, grounded, and not someone a killer should underestimate. Franklin also keeps the pacing tight and slips in small comic touches along the way. The American stars help secure international distribution, but Franklin smartly treats them as outsiders in the Australian landscape. Homicidal is probably not the film you'd expect from William Castle, a director best known for horror gimmicks and crowd pleasers like House on Haunted Hill. But in 1961, he decided to make his own Hitchcock-style thriller, and the result is a surprisingly enjoyable one. The film follows a mysterious blonde on the run who arrives at an isolated mansion with a plan to secure a large inheritance. The plot is notoriously difficult to talk about without running straight into spoilers, and since this movie is far less well known than Psycho, it's better not to push too far into details. It's enough to say that the suspicious blonde is clearly modelled on Psycho's Marion Crane, here played with campy flair by Joan Marshall. Castle is often dismissed as a cut-rate Hitchcock, and that label isn't entirely unfair. Still, Homicidal does a solid job of building intrigue and sustained suspense. Castle also leaned into his usual publicity tricks. The most famous was the fright break, where audience members were given a chance to leave the theatre before things got too intense. There was a catch though. Anyone who left had to sit in a designated section called Coward's Corner. Charade might be the classiest Hitchcock ripoff you're ever likely to see. It stars Cary Grant, one of Hitchcock's favourite leading men, in one of his final film roles, alongside Audrey Hepburn. And almost everything about it feels like it could belong in a proper Hitchcock picture. Peter Stone's screenplay follows a newly widowed woman who suddenly finds herself on the run from a group of criminals, all after the money and valuables her husband left behind. Along the way, the film leans heavily into mistaken identity, women in danger, sustained suspense, sharp dialogue, and a sweeping romantic angle. Add Henry Mancini's nerve-shredding score and a look Hitchcock himself would probably have approved of, and it easily rises above most Hitchcock-inspired films. The film was later remade in 2002 as The Truth About Charlie, starring Thandie Newton and Mark Wahlberg. That version plays more like a Bourne-style update. It's serviceable enough, but it never comes close to capturing the original's nostalgic charm. Brian De Palma didn't even wait 4 years after Obsession before taking on his next Hitchcock ripoff. In 1980, he doubled down with Dressed to Kill. The film opens with a sexually frustrated housewife, played by Angie Dickinson, who visits her psychiatrist, played by Michael Caine. Later that day, she is brutally murdered. The only witness is a prostitute, played by Nancy Allen, who soon realizes she may be next. From there, the story moves fast into paranoia, danger, and pursuit. Like Obsession, Dressed to Kill is less interested in tight narrative logic and more focused on heightened melodramatic style. This is De Palma's version of Psycho. Both films share themes of transvestism, similar murder setups, plenty of MacGuffins, and the early removal of a major character. De Palma just updates the formula for the late 70s and early 80s, pushing the sex, violence, and twists further. Rip-off or homage? It hardly matters. Dressed to Kill is tense, stylish, and consistently engaging. And if this side of De Palma works for you, his other Hitchcock-inflected films are well worth seeking out too.